Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes I encountered while reviewing submissions for Assignment 1 in my CS 253 class in the fall of 2023. First, make sure to comment your code thoroughly or it will not be reviewed. Please see this link for instructions on how to comment your code. You can also look at the many examples that we go over in class for how to comment code. Also, don't remove the to-do markers or your code will not be reviewed. It's very important that you do this because that's how I review the code quickly, by going to the to-do markers. Let's start taking a look at some of the problems with methods. So this solution here doesn't meet the specification since perform crawl needs to use the Java comment fork join pool as described in the specification. Also, please replace the following two calls to fork and join with a single call to invoke, which of course is called on the comment fork join pool. Some more problems with perform crawl. This code doesn't meet the specification above, also because it doesn't use the comment fork join pool. And also, you should return the result from calling invoke. And when you do that, there's no need to call task.join as done here. You can remove that code. This code here is also from perform crawl, so let's fix that. So make sure that you reformat this code so that each method is on its own line, and comment each line, and also don't use submit and join, but instead use invoke. This does in fact show how to use the comment fork join pool, however, so that will give you a hint on how to do that. But don't write code that goes off the end of the right of the screen. Instead, what you want to do is you want to basically write code like this, and then you would put comments for each of the lines that you need to have here explaining what it is you're doing. Of course, in this particular case, you don't need to have the submit and join. So this code can be made much more concise by using invoke instead of using submit and using join. So yet another thing that you need to fix when you rewrite this code. So let me go ahead and clean this up so that it's all looking the way it did before. Some more problems with perform crawl. This code is way too complicated, and it should just create an instance of the URL crawler task and then call invoke on this in the comment fork join pool. All the other stuff belongs elsewhere, for example, in the compute method of URL crawler task. Now we're into some other methods. These are some of the factor methods. Please replace the use of the try catch block with a call to the exception utils rethrow function. That'll clean up your code quite a bit. And this code is way too complicated. You just need to make an instance of process image task and return it. That's all you need to do in make process image task, which is a factor method. Down here, another problem with make process image task. This code will work, but it's much easier just to replace everything here with, or rather everything from here with URL : new, which is a constructor reference. Let's take a look now at URL crawler class. You don't need to have any fields like the count field. Of course, you do need some other fields, but you don't need the count field. Instead, keep track of the count using local variables, which are thread safe. Don't allocate a new fork join pool. That's unnecessary. Use the comment fork join pool up earlier in the context of perform crawl. Don't initialize count. And whatever you do, since you don't need to allocate the fork join pool anywhere, you don't need to call shutdown on a fork join pool. And definitely don't call shutdown on the comment fork join pool. Let's take a look at the compute method from URL crawler task. Don't use equals here. Likewise, don't use contains. Instead, use the add method, which is a so-called atomic check then act operator, and then check to see the return value from add to determine if you've already seen this URI. And there was a call to add here, which I removed. Don't call that here either. You don't need to use a try catch block here. You don't need to call the crawl page method in the context of call in manage block. That's unnecessary. Let's take a look at another problem with compute from URL crawler task. Don't use contains. Same problem, it's not thread safe. Instead, use add, which is this atomic check then act method. Down here in crawl page, there's no need to keep rechecking about the depth. That needs to be done up in compute and nowhere else. Make sure you call get page within the context of call in manage blocker as per the specification comments above. That's very important because the get page method could in fact block, or probably will block, and we want to make sure that we add an extra thread or have the fork join pool add an extra thread to the comment fork join pool. This code here doesn't belong here. That belongs in the process page method, which you should call here. Speaking of process page, let's take a look at some issues with process page. This code is correct, but it's too complicated. You don't need to have 3 local variables. You just need the all elements local variable. You don't need to have all these nested or all these loops They're not nested, just all these loops one after another. Instead, merge all that code into this one loop, and it actually is a little cleaner, and you don't need to loop multiple times. Down here for process page, make sure you pass the right parameters to get page elements. Otherwise, you won't get a chance to walk through any of the page elements because it won't know what you're asking for. And you don't need to have this loop. The call to fork that you would need to have above is sufficient. There's no need to call submit on the comment pool in process page. That's the wrong place to do that. These things need to be handled here when you fork. Another problem with process page, don't keep rechecking this condition over and over again. That's just done in the URL crawler task compute method. Yet some more issues. You don't need to call the get page elements method in call in manage blocker. You don't need to use an atomic integer here. Just add 1 to the depth parameter just by adding 1 to it, and that'll work just fine. Please don't use Java Streams. We'll use Java Streams in the next assignment. I'll make this note a couple other places. There's no need to use Java Streams here. For the compute method in process image task, you don't need to use a try catch block here. That's unnecessary. You also don't need to use an atomic reference in compute. And what you need to do is call get or download image and return and store the result that comes back from get or download image into a local variable and then use that. There's no need to use an atomic reference, atomic image, This is all too complicated. And this is also unnecessary as long as you make a local variable and store the results for get or download image into it. Some more problems with compute. Don't use call and manage blocker here, but instead use the manage blocker download image as the second parameter here. You don't need to do all this extra stuff. Yet some more problems with compute. Don't use call and manage blocker. And also, you don't need to pass a null parameter. In fact, do not pass a null parameter here. That's not the right thing to do. Instead, you want to pass the appropriate method that we talked about earlier. Make sure also you check to see the image is non-null before you call transform image. Otherwise, you'll have problems with some of the tests, I think. Don't use Java Streams for transform image. We'll use that in the next assignment, so don't use it here. You don't need to use call and manage block here. These are all handled other ways. You only need to use call and manage block if it's going to block and it's not handled through some other means. And you don't need to use call and manage block here either. This implementation of transform image is too complicated. Just use the appropriate factor method defined above to make a new perform transform task instance. And down here, once again, don't use a Java stream here. You get plenty of chances to use that shortly. Please get in the habit of not using index-based for loops wherever you can, but instead either use a Java for each loop or you could use the Java for each method. In this case, I think the for each loop will work fine. There's some people who use for each method, but you have to know some things about atomic integers and so on to make that work properly. Down here in count transforms, you don't need to call submit here. That's unnecessary. I'm not sure what that's doing, but that's extra work that you don't need, so don't do that. Down here in perform transform tasks, there's more you need to do here. Please watch the walkthrough video for more instructions on what you need to do in perform transform task. And now we're here at the last method, which is call in manage blocker. This is way too complicated. All you need to do is just use the blocking task helper class and call a method it defines to go ahead and call the supplier in a managed block context. So that is the walkthrough of my frequently made mistakes that I encountered when I reviewed the code. These are what I typically do for each assignment. Please make sure you watch this video carefully. Take a look at the comments on your code. If you didn't submit your assignment properly, then look at this assignment walkthrough video and make sure that you address anything here that corresponds to your solution.